I am Stella, 34 years old and a senior financial auditor. I spent 5 grueling years working 80-hour weeks to buy my parents a $547,000 dream beach house in Florida, paying for it entirely in cash. I just wanted to give them the peaceful retirement they deserved. But last Friday, I pulled into their driveway to surprise them for the weekend, and my stomach dropped. My mother was trembling and sobbing on the front porch, while a strange woman aggressively took photos of the property. When I rushed inside, I found my own sister and her husband carelessly packing my father's most cherished belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. They told me they were selling the house right out from under us to put my parents in a facility. What they did not know was the massive legal secret I had hidden in the property deed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to step up and protect your family from greedy relatives who thought they could walk all over you. The Florida sun was beating down hard that afternoon, but I felt completely cold the moment I turned my car onto my parents' street. I had not told them I was coming. I had just finished a massive corporate audit in Atlanta and decided to make the 5-hour drive down to the coast to spend the weekend with them. I bought this beautiful 4-bedroom property 2 years ago. It had a wraparound porch, a meticulously landscaped garden, and a direct view of the ocean. It was supposed to be their safe haven. Instead, as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a sleek black SUV parked haphazardly on the lawn. My mother Diane was sitting on the porch swing, clutching a tissue to her face and sobbing uncontrollably. I threw my car into park and leaped out, leaving the door wide open. "Mom!" I yelled, sprinting up the walkway. Before I could even reach her, a woman stepped out from behind the large azalea bushes. She was wearing a sharp-tailored suit, holding a digital camera and a clipboard. She did not even look up from her screen as she snapped another picture of the front windows. "Excuse me," I said loudly, stepping between her and the house. "Who are you, and what are you doing on this property?" The woman finally lowered her camera and looked at me with a condescending smirk. She looked me up and down, taking in my travel-wrinkled clothes. "I am Caroline," she said in a brisk professional tone. "I am the listing agent for this property. I need you to step aside so I can get a clear shot of the entryway. We are trying to fast-track this listing to hit the market by Monday morning, and I am losing the natural light." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. "Listing agent," I repeated, my voice rising. "This house is not for sale. You need to get off this property right now before I call the police." Caroline rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh like I was a nuisance wasting her time. "Look, honey, I do not know who you are, but I am under a strict contract with the legal owners of this estate. They hired me to expedite a cash sale, and that is exactly what I am doing. If you have a problem with it, I suggest you take it up with them. Now please move." I ignored her and ran up the porch steps to my mother. Mom was shaking so badly she could barely hold her tissue. She looked frail, her eyes red and puffy. "Mom, what is happening?" I asked, dropping to my knees in front of her. "Who is that woman out there? Why is she talking about selling the house?" Diane choked on a sob and pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "It is your sister," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Brittany and Jamal. They showed up early this morning. They said your father is getting too sick, and the house is too much work. They said they are taking over and moving us out. Stella, they are taking your father's things." A wave of pure white hot anger washed over me. My sister Brittany is 36 years old and has been the golden child of our family since the day she was born. While I spent my 20s studying for my financial licenses and building a career, Brittany drifted from one expensive hobby to another, always funded by my parents. 3 years ago, she married Jamal. Jamal is 38, a charismatic African-American man who always dresses in designer labels and talks a big game about his entrepreneurial ventures. The problem is none of his businesses ever succeed, and he always ends up needing a bailout. They had been living rent-free in my parents' old house back in our hometown ever since I moved my parents down to this beach house. I stood up from the porch, leaving my mother for a moment, and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. I pushed it open so hard it slammed against the interior wall. The sight inside made my blood boil. The living room, which I had personally decorated with comfortable coastal furniture and soft rugs, was completely destroyed. Cardboard boxes were piled high against the walls. The curtains had been ripped down and thrown onto the couch. Standing in the middle of the room was Brittany. She was holding a clipboard similar to the realtor's directing the chaos. Jamal was standing by the fireplace, roughly grabbing items off the mantel. I watched in horror as Jamal grabbed my father's antique mahogany watchbox. Inside were the vintage timepieces my father had collected over 40 years, along with his military service medals. Jamal did not even open it carefully. He just tossed the heavy box into a cardboard bin where it landed with a sickening thud against a pile of books. "Hey!" I screamed, storming into the room. "Put that down right now! Get your hands off his things!" Jamal froze and looked up, a smug expression crossing his face. Brittany spun around, completely unfazed by my sudden appearance. She did not look guilty or caught. She actually rolled her eyes, exactly like the realtor had done outside. "Stella, what are you doing here?" Brittany asked, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "You are supposed to be in Atlanta. You are interrupting our schedule. We have a junk removal crew coming in 2 hours to clear out the rest of this clutter." "Clutter!" I yelled, marching right up to her. "That is Dad's military history. This is their home. What the hell do you think you are doing? Mom is outside crying her eyes out, and there is a woman in the bushes taking pictures of my house." Jamal stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Brittany. He wiped his hands on his jeans and gave me a patronizing smile. "Chill out, Stella," he said, his tone smooth and irritatingly calm. "We are just handling family business. Richard's mind is going. You know he was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. He is slipping. They cannot afford the upkeep on a massive place like this. It is a financial burden they do not need. Brittany and I are just stepping up to be the responsible ones. We are liquidating this oversized burden to get them into a proper facility where they can be cared for." I felt a vein pulsing in my forehead. "A financial burden," I snapped, glaring at Jamal. "I bought this house in cash, Jamal. I pay the property taxes, I pay the homeowners association fees, I pay the landscaping company. They do not have a single bill for this property. How exactly is it a financial burden?" Brittany scoffed and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Stella, stop acting like the savior. Dad is sick. The maintenance is too much for Mom to manage, even with your little checks paying for the lawn care. It is dangerous for them to be here alone." Jamal found a highly recommended assisted living facility upstate. It is practically a resort, but it requires a massive buy-in, so we are selling this place to fund their care. It is the only logical solution. I knew Brittany was lying. I am a financial auditor. It is literally my job to spot discrepancies and uncover hidden motives. I had researched the facilities in our home state when Dad first got his diagnosis. The places Brittany considered a resort were ridiculously overpriced, and there were plenty of affordable, high-quality care options right here in Florida that I had already offered to pay for. Furthermore, the phrase "liquidating this oversized burden" sounded exactly like the corporate jargon Jamal used right before one of his shell companies went bankrupt. "You are not selling anything," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I walked past Jamal and stood directly in front of the television, grabbing the sides of it so he could not pack it up. "You two are going to walk out that front door, get in your car, and drive back home. If you take one more item out of this house, I am calling the police and having you arrested for burglary." Jamal laughed, a deep, booming laugh that echoed in the empty living room. "Call them," he challenged, taking a step toward me. "Go ahead, Stella. Pull out your phone and call the cops right now. Let us see what they say." I pulled my phone out of my back pocket and held it up so they could both see the screen. My thumb hovered right over the emergency call button. "I am not playing games with you two," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings of the living room. "You have exactly 10 seconds to drop my father's things, walk out that front door, and get off my property before I call the police and have you both arrested for trespassing and attempted burglary." Jamal did not even flinch. Instead, he let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that bounced off the bare walls. He tossed a silver picture frame into a nearby box and crossed his arms over his chest. "Go ahead, Stella." He challenged, a wide, arrogant smile spreading across his face. "Call the cops. Tell them to send their best officers. I would love to see the look on their faces when they get here." I glared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You think I will not do it?" I asked, pressing the screen to wake up the phone. "You are stealing from a sick old man. You really think the police are going to take your side against me?" Brittany let out a heavy sigh, sounding completely bored by my anger. She slowly walked over to the kitchen island, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She reached into her oversized designer leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She did not look panicked or guilty. She looked like she was about to swat a fly. "You are always so dramatic," Stella Brittany said, tracing her manicured fingernail along the edge of the folder. "You swoop in here in your cheap business suit, pretending to be the big hero. But you are completely clueless about what is actually going on in this family." She tossed the folder onto the granite countertop. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped right at the edge, inches away from my hands. "Read it," she commanded, tilting her head. I stared at the folder, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. I slowly lowered my phone and took a step toward the kitchen island. I picked up the heavy packet of papers. The front page was stamped with a bright blue official notary seal from the state of Florida. Across the top, printed in bold, undeniable black letters, were the words "Durable Financial Power of Attorney." My eyes frantically scanned the dense legal text. According to the document in my hands, my father Richard had surrendered absolute and complete control of his entire life to my sister. The clauses granted Brittany total authority over his bank accounts, his retirement funds, his medical decisions, and his real estate assets. She had the power to buy, sell, liquidate, and transfer anything with his name on it. I flipped to the last page. There at the bottom was my father's signature. It was shaky, uneven, and barely legible, a heartbreaking physical proof of his declining mental state. And right below his name was my mother's signature, perfectly clear, acting as the primary witness and consenting spouse. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dad has dementia," I whispered, looking up at my sister in absolute horror. "He does not even know what day of the week it is half the time. He does not have the cognitive capacity to understand what this document means. You manipulated him into signing away his life." Brittany scoffed and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "Oh, please," she said dismissively. "Dad knew exactly what he was doing. He knows that I am the only one who actually cares about keeping this family together. He knows that you are always too busy playing corporate auditor in Atlanta to actually deal with the day-to-day mess of his illness." "And what about Mom?" I demanded, waving the papers in the air. "Did you threaten her to get this signature?" "I did not have to threaten her." Brittany laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "Mom is exhausted, Stella. She is tired of dealing with his doctor appointments, his memory lapses, and his tantrums. All I had to do was tell her that Jamal and I would take over all the heavy lifting. I told her we would handle the finances, the property, and finding a nice care facility for him so she could finally relax." She signed the paper, crying tears of joy, because someone was finally stepping up to relieve her burden. Jamal walked over and placed a heavy hand on Brittany's shoulder, looking at me with absolute contempt. "Watch your mouth, Stella," he warned, his tone dropping into a threatening register. "You need to respect the legal authority in this room. Brittany is the executor of your father's estate now. Your little cash donations to the lawn care company do not mean anything anymore." He stepped closer to me, his tall frame looming over the kitchen island. "It was really cute of you to try and play the hero today," he sneered, pointing a finger at the document in my hand. "Rushing in here, threatening to call the cops, acting like you own the place. But the truth is, you have absolutely zero legal rights here. None. You are a ghost. You do not get a say in where they live. You do not get a say in how their money is spent. And you certainly do not get a say in when we sell this house." I stared into Jamal's smug, arrogant eyes. He was so confident. He honestly believed he had me backed into a corner. The title company has already processed the paperwork. Jamal continued, thoroughly enjoying every second of his monologue. We have a cash buyer lined up. They love the ocean view. We close first thing on Monday morning, and there is not a single thing you can do to stop it. So you can either put your phone away and help us carry these boxes to the truck, or you can get the hell out of our house. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the heavy legal document trembling slightly in my hands. The audacity of what they had done was almost suffocating. They had targeted the two most vulnerable people in my life. My father, whose brilliant mind was slowly betraying him, and my mother, who had always been too passive and avoidant to fight back against Brittany's forceful personality. Brittany had weaponized her status as the golden child to steal their entire future. "You really think a notary stamp makes this legal?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. "That is elder abuse, Brittany. It is financial exploitation. Any competent judge will invalidate this entire document in 5 minutes." Brittany threw her head back and laughed loudly. "Invalidate it," she mocked, clapping her hands together slowly. "By the time you hire a lawyer and file a petition in probate court, this house will be sold. The cash will be safely transferred into an account that I control. The new owners will have changed the locks. You are too late, Stella. The wheels are already in motion and you cannot stop the train." Jamal nodded in agreement, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. "She is right, Stella. You are a numbers girl. You know how the system works. It is slow, it is bureaucratic, and it favors whoever holds the power of attorney. And right now, that is my beautiful wife." I looked down at the forged signatures again. My mind was racing, flipping through financial statutes, property laws, and banking regulations like a Rolodex. My sister and her husband were not sophisticated criminals. They were greedy, desperate, and incredibly arrogant. They saw a high-value asset and assumed they could just bulldoze their way into selling it by intimidating an old man. They assumed that because they had the power of attorney over Richard, they had the power to sell the house. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was just a naive daughter who had blindly handed over a massive pile of cash to her parents and hoped for the best. But I am a senior financial auditor. I spend my life tearing apart complex corporate frauds, uncovering hidden offshore accounts, and building impenetrable financial structures. 2 years ago, when I decided to buy this $500,000 property for my parents, I knew exactly who my sister was. I knew exactly who Jamal was. And I knew that if I put a $547,000 asset directly in my parents' names, it would only be a matter of time before Brittany found a way to steal it. So I did not put it in their names. I looked back up at Jamal and Brittany. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, looking like they had just won the lottery. They were so busy gloating over their stolen power of attorney that they had completely failed to verify the most basic rule of real estate. You cannot sell something you do not own. I slowly closed the manila folder and handed it back to Brittany. She snatched it out of my hand with a victorious smirk. "You win," I said quietly, letting my shoulders slump in mock defeat. I made sure my voice sounded shaky, like I was holding back tears. "If Mom signed it, and Dad signed it, then I guess there is nothing I can do." Brittany smiled, a genuine look of vicious satisfaction lighting up her face. Finally, she said, letting out a dramatic breath, "I am glad you are choosing to be reasonable for once in your life. Now please go outside and tell Mom to stop crying and making a scene. We have a lot of work to do before the moving truck gets here." I turned around without saying another word and walked slowly toward the front door. Every step I took was deliberate. I was playing the part of the defeated, broken sister perfectly, but inside my heart was pounding with a cold, calculated thrill. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use the law to crush our family, but they had no idea that they had just handed me all the evidence I needed to send them both to federal prison. As I stepped out onto the sunlit porch to comfort my mother, the countdown to Monday morning's closing table had officially begun. I did not waste another second in that living room. I walked straight out to the porch, grabbed my mother's hand, and led her to my car. I told her we were going to get Dad and take him to his doctor immediately. Mom was crying, her hands shaking violently as she buckled her seatbelt. We drove 3 blocks to the community center where Dad spent his Friday mornings playing chess. When I saw him sitting at the patio table staring blankly at the board, while his opponent waited, my heart broke. He looked so small and vulnerable. I walked up, placed my hand on his shoulder, and told him it was time to go see the doctor. He smiled at me, his eyes lighting up with genuine warmth, but he called me by my sister's name. That devastating moment solidified everything I needed to know. I guided him to the back seat of my car. The drive to the neurology clinic was agonizingly quiet. Mom stared out the passenger window, refusing to speak, while Dad hummed softly to a country song on the radio, completely unaware that his own daughter and son-in-law were gutting his home and attempting to steal his future. Luckily, the medical clinic was relatively empty, and because I was listed as my father's primary medical proxy, I convinced the receptionist to squeeze us in for an urgent evaluation. Dr. Bennett. My father's trusted neurologist was a kind, soft-spoken man who had been monitoring Dad's cognitive decline for the past year. When the triage nurse called us back, I held my father's arm tightly, guiding him into the brightly lit examination room. Mom sat in the vinyl corner chair, wringing her hands in her lap. I explained the terrifying situation to Dr. Bennett, keeping my voice calm and strictly objective despite the absolute rage boiling in my veins. I told him about the sweeping power of attorney document my sister had produced out of nowhere. I told him about the frantic packing at the house and the realtor taking pictures. Dr. Bennett listened closely, his expression growing more serious and concerned with every word I spoke. He turned his rolling chair to face my father, offering him a warm, reassuring smile. He began the standard cognitive evaluation, asking Dad simple baseline questions about the date, the current president, and what he had eaten for breakfast that morning. Watching the medical evaluation was one of the most painful experiences of my entire life. My father, a man who used to calculate complex mathematical equations in his head, just for fun, struggled to remember the current year. He confidently stated it was 2014, missing the mark by an entire decade. When Dr. Bennett asked him to draw a clock face showing 10 minutes past 11, my father drew a jagged circle and placed all the numbers entirely on the right side, a classic neurological sign of severe cognitive impairment. He laughed nervously, trying to brush off his confusion as a simple lack of sleep, but the medical reality was brutally undeniable. Dr. Bennett turned to face me and my mother, his voice gentle but incredibly firm. He confirmed that my father's early-stage dementia had rapidly progressed over the last few months. His cognitive functions were severely compromised. There was absolutely no medical or legal way my father could have understood the complex implications of a sweeping financial power of attorney document. The contract my sister held was not just highly unethical, it was a product of direct, targeted manipulation. Just as Dr. Bennett was writing his clinical notes, the room went silent. And then my father spoke. He leaned forward in his chair, looking innocently at me, his eyes wide and serious. "Stella," he asked, his voice wavering slightly, "did Jamal find a buyer for my golf clubs yet? He said he needed the money for the down payment on his new car. He promised he would buy me a cheaper set next month." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A heavy silence fell over the small examination room. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with both hands, tears welling up in her eyes all over again. The golf clubs. My father loved those clubs more than anything. They were a custom set he had saved up for years to buy for his retirement. Jamal was not just trying to sell the beach house. He was systematically stripping my father of his prized personal possessions to fund his luxurious lifestyle. He was treating my father like an automatic teller machine, convincing a confused old man to hand over valuables under the guise of helping the family. The depth of the financial abuse was staggering. It was not just a sudden grab for real estate. It was an ongoing, calculated extraction of wealth. I looked over at Dr. Bennett. He had stopped writing completely. He looked just as disgusted as I felt. "Doctor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but trembling with absolute resolve. "I need official documentation right now. I need a certified medical letter stating explicitly that my father has lacked the cognitive capacity to sign any binding legal agreements for at least the past 6 months. Dr. Bennett did not hesitate. He nodded firmly, turned to his computer keyboard, and began to type rapidly. 10 minutes later, I walked out of that neurology clinic holding a sealed, signed medical affidavit. It was undeniable expert proof that the power of attorney my sister paraded around was completely fraudulent and legally void. They thought they had the law on their side. But as I helped my fragile father back into the car, clutching the heavy envelope that held the absolute key to their destruction, I knew the real truth. They had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to take them down once and for all. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. Growing up, it was a time for genuine connection, a day when my parents opened their doors to everyone. But this year, the fourth Thursday of November felt like walking straight into a hostile war zone. It had been exactly 2 weeks since the terrifying incident at the beach house. 2 weeks since my older sister Brittany and her husband Jamal waved that fraudulent power of attorney in my face. In that incredibly short amount of time, they had completely taken over my parents' finances. Brittany wasted absolutely no time weaponizing her new legal authority. She decided to host a massive, opulent Thanksgiving dinner for our entire extended family. But she was not paying for the organic heritage turkey, the expensive floral centerpieces, or the premium imported wine with her own money. She was funding her lavish lifestyle directly from my father's hard-earned retirement accounts. I was explicitly uninvited to this gathering. Brittany had sent a long dramatic group text to the entire family, conveniently leaving me off the chain, stating that my presence would be far too stressful for my declining father. But I was not about to sit alone in my apartment while my sister played the role of the devoted daughter on my parents' dime. I put on my best sweater, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to their house. When I pulled up to the curb, the street was completely lined with cars belonging to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I walked up the concrete driveway, my heart pounding a heavy, anxious rhythm against my ribs. I did not bother knocking. I just turned the brass handle and pushed the front door wide open. The house was filled with the rich smell of roasted garlic, expensive cinnamon candles, and fresh-baked pies. Loud jazz music was playing from the brand new top-of-the-line sound system Jamal had just purchased using my parents' money. But the moment I stepped into the crowded living room, the festive atmosphere completely shattered. It was like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the space. Conversations abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Several of my cousins exchanged awkward, uncomfortable glances. Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister, actually turned her back to me, taking a long sip of her wine and muttering something under her breath to my uncle. The hostility in the room was thick and absolutely suffocating. It was immediately obvious what had been happening behind my back over the last 2 weeks. Brittany had been running a relentless smear campaign. She had painted herself as the overwhelmed, selfless savior and cast me as the greedy, absent daughter who only cared about my corporate career. She had successfully convinced our entire extended family that I had selfishly abandoned my parents in their time of greatest need. Jamal was the first person to approach me. He was wearing a tailored designer cashmere sweater that I knew for a fact was paid for by my father's stolen credit card. He stepped directly into my path, puffing out his chest and trying to block my view of the dining room. He lowered his voice, trying to sound intimidating, but keeping a fake tight smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the large audience watching us. "Stella, what exactly are you doing here?" he hissed angrily through his perfectly white teeth. "You know you were not invited. You are going to upset your mother, and we do not need your toxic energy today." I looked right past his shoulder. Through the large archway, I could see my father sitting alone in a leather recliner. He looked entirely overwhelmed by the noise, staring blankly at the television. My mother was nervously rearranging cloth napkins on the dining table, looking exhausted and incredibly frail. I stepped around Jamal, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an argument or a scene. "I am here to spend Thanksgiving with my family, Jamal," I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the silent living room. I walked straight into the formal dining room, pulled out an empty wooden chair, and sat right down at the end of the large table. The tension was absolutely palpable. My mother looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, clearly bracing herself for an explosion. Right on cue, Brittany emerged from the kitchen, carrying a massive silver platter of roasted vegetables. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting boldly at her perfectly set table. For a split second, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage crossed her face. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the tray. But my sister is a master manipulator. She quickly recovered, replacing her genuine anger with a look of profound, tragic sadness. She set the heavy platter down on the table and picked up her crystal wine glass. She tapped the side of it with a silver spoon. The gentle ringing sound brought everyone shuffling into the dining room. Aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered around the perimeter, looking between me and Brittany with eager, silent anticipation. Brittany took a deep, shaky breath, letting a single perfectly timed tear roll down her heavily contoured cheek. She raised her glass high into the air. "I just want to thank everyone for coming today," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured, sickening emotion. "This has been the hardest month of my entire life. Taking over the primary care for Dad has been an exhausting, heartbreaking burden. Some days, I do not know how Jamal and I are going to survive the constant stress and the endless medical bills." She paused dramatically, making sure to wipe her eyes with a napkin, and then looked directly at me with a sad, pitiful smile. "It is incredibly painful when the people you thought would help you step up decide to turn their backs and walk away instead. But family is about sacrifice. It is about staying in the trenches when things get ugly and expensive. Jamal and I will gladly carry this heavy cross, because that is what true love actually looks like." We wanted to provide this beautiful catered meal today to remind us all that we must stick together even when certain people abandon us in our darkest hour. "Let us eat." The room fell dead silent as Brittany lowered her crystal wine glass. She had played her part perfectly, painting herself as the ultimate martyr for the entire family to see. My aunts and uncles were nodding in solemn agreement, their faces etched with sympathy for my sister and clear disdain for me. My mother looked down at her lap, refusing to meet my eyes, clearly hoping I would just quietly apologize and leave without causing a fuss. Jamal stood near the carving knife, puffing his chest out, ready to play the protective husband. They all expected me to start screaming. They expected me to throw a childish tantrum which would only prove Brittany's point that I was unstable and toxic. But I am an auditor. I do not throw emotional tantrums. I present undeniable evidence. I slowly pushed my wooden chair back and stood up. The scraping sound echoed loudly against the hardwood floor, cutting through the quiet jazz music playing in the background. Every single pair of eyes in the dining room snapped toward me. Brittany offered a sad, patronizing smile, probably anticipating a tearful apology or a dramatic exit. Instead, I reached into the oversized leather tote bag I had brought with me and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was not a legal power of attorney like the one she had weaponized against me 2 weeks ago. This folder was packed with hundreds of pages of raw, unedited financial data. I did not say a word as I walked slowly down the length of the long dining table. My cousins leaned back in their chairs, watching me with wide eyes. I stopped right next to Brittany, who was standing at the head of the table next to the massive, perfectly roasted turkey. "What are you doing, Stella?" Brittany asked, her fake sweet voice wavering just a fraction of an inch as she looked at the folder. "We are about to eat. If you are going to make a scene, I am going to have to ask Jamal to escort you outside." I did not even look at her. I raised the heavy folder high in the air and dropped it directly onto the silver platter holding the turkey. The heavy thud made the crystal glasses rattle aggressively. Gravy splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. Several of my aunts gasped in sheer horror. Jamal immediately lunged forward, his face twisting with genuine anger as he reached for the documents. "Have you lost your mind?" Jamal shouted, his authoritative facade crumbling instantly. "Get out of our house right now." I slammed my hand down on top of the folder before he could grab it, leaning across the table and glaring right into his eyes. "This is not your house, Jamal," I said, my voice cold and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear perfectly. "And that turkey was bought with my father's stolen credit card. But if you want to talk about family sacrifices, let us look at the actual numbers." Because while Brittany was crying crocodile tears about medical bills, she forgot to mention the real reason you two are so desperate for fast cash. I flipped open the folder. The first page was a massive red spreadsheet I had meticulously compiled over the last 48 hours. I looked around the room, making direct eye contact with my Aunt Susan, then my Uncle George, and finally my mother. "Did Brittany tell you all about Jamal's incredible new tech venture?" I asked the room, my voice dripping with absolute sarcasm. "You know, the one he has been bragging about at family events for the last 2 years. Well, I decided to do a little professional digging into his public financial records. It turns out Jamal decided to invest heavily in a highly volatile cryptocurrency startup. And by invest, I mean he took out massive high-interest personal loans, leveraged every single line of credit he had, and completely drained his and Brittany's savings accounts when the market crashed." Jamal's face instantly drained of all color. He took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Brittany grabbed his arm, her perfectly contoured face contorting into a mask of pure, undeniable panic. "Shut up, Stella!" Brittany hissed, her voice dropping its sweet facade entirely. "You are making things up. You are just jealous and trying to ruin Thanksgiving because Dad trusted me instead of you." I pulled a stack of official bank documents from the folder and held them up high for everyone to see. These are 5 different notices of rejected commercial bank loans from the last 6 months. I read aloud, slapping the papers down on the table one by one so my relatives could see the bold red lettering. Jamal has been desperately trying to secure capital to cover his massive losses, but no legitimate bank will touch him because his credit score is entirely destroyed. And here are the final notices from 3 different debt collection agencies. Jamal owes exactly $212,000. He is 3 weeks away from a forced bankruptcy and a potential federal tax lien that will seize everything they own. The silence in the dining room was absolutely deafening. Nobody was looking at me with disdain anymore. They were all staring at Jamal and Brittany in complete shock. My Uncle George slowly put down his wineglass, his face turning a deep shade of red as he processed the staggering amount of debt. I turned my attention entirely to my sister, who was literally shaking with rage and fear. "You did not take over Dad's finances because his memory was slipping," I said, my voice echoing off the walls with relentless precision. "You did not force him to sign that power of attorney because you wanted to help Mom carry the burden. You did not pack up his belongings and list my beach house for sale because you found a beautiful resort facility for his care. You did it because you are completely broke. You are drowning in Jamal's catastrophic financial debt, and the loan sharks are circling your house. You realized that my father was sitting on a $547,000 asset, and you decided to steal it to save yourselves from ruin." "That is a lie," Jamal yelled, his voice cracking loudly. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes wide and wild with desperation. "She is a liar. She fabricated all of this because she is mad that Richard gave us control of the estate. She is just trying to embarrass us in front of the family." I pulled out the final document from the folder. It was a copy of the expedited listing agreement they had signed with Caroline, the ruthless realtor from the beach house. I slid it across the wooden table directly toward my mother. Mom stared down at it, her hands trembling violently as she read the highlighted terms. "If I am lying, Jamal, then explain this contract," I demanded, pointing at the paper. "Explain why you and Brittany signed a legally binding agreement to sell the beach house for cash, accepting an offer that is $40,000 below market value just to force a closing by this coming Monday. You are rapidly liquidating my parents' safe haven to pay off your crypto debt before the government seizes your bank accounts. You are going to dump my parents in a miserable state-run nursing home and pocket the rest of the equity for your own lavish lifestyle." My mother let out a soft, heartbreaking sob. She looked up at Brittany, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with absolute betrayal. "Brittany, is this true?" she whispered. "Are you selling the house to pay Jamal's debts?" "Mom, do not listen to her," Brittany pleaded, her voice high-pitched and frantic as she rushed to my mother's side. "Stella is twisting everything out of proportion. We were going to use the money for Dad. We were just going to borrow a little bit of the equity to cover a temporary cash flow problem. We would have paid it back with interest, I swear." "A temporary cash flow problem," I laughed, shaking my head in utter disgust. "You stole my father's antique watch collection and his military medals. I heard Dad ask his doctor if you had sold his golf clubs yet so you could buy a new car. You are systematically stripping them of everything they own, piece by piece." The entire family erupted into chaos. Aunt Susan started yelling at Brittany, asking how she could do something so evil to her own father. Uncle George stood up and demanded Jamal explain the bank documents scattered across the table. The perfectly orchestrated Thanksgiving dinner had completely imploded. Brittany was no longer the tragic self-sacrificing hero of the family. She was fully exposed as a manipulative, greedy fraud who was willing to destroy her own parents just to save her husband from his massive financial failures. I stood there at the end of the long dining table, my chest heaving slightly as I waited for the reality of the situation to finally sink in. I fully expected my mother to stand up and demand that Jamal leave. I expected my aunt and uncle to rally around me and protect my father from this blatant financial exploitation. But that is the thing about deeply toxic families. They do not want the truth. They want comfort. And the truth I had just dropped onto their pristine Thanksgiving table was far too ugly, far too uncomfortable for them to process. So instead of turning their outrage toward the people who were actively robbing them, they instinctively turned it toward the person who dared to turn on the lights. The deafening silence was broken by my Aunt Susan. She let out a long, theatrical sigh and dramatically rubbed her temples. "Stella, was it really necessary to bring this up today?" she asked, her voice dripping with irritation rather than concern. "Jamal is an entrepreneur. Everyone knows that starting a business involves financial risks. You cannot just waltz in here with a stack of papers and try to destroy your sister's marriage over some bank loans." I stared at her, completely stunned by her mental gymnastics. "Aunt Susan," I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "These are not just business risks. They are selling my parents' home behind my back to pay off loan sharks. They are trying to dump Dad in a state facility to hide their own bankruptcy." But before I could even finish my sentence, Uncle George chimed in, crossing his arms and shaking his head at me. "Now hold on a minute, Stella," he said sternly. "Jamal has always been a provider. He made a bad investment, sure. But at least he is here. At least he and Brittany are the ones taking Dad to his doctor's appointments, while you are off living your fancy corporate life in the city. You cannot just write a check for the lawn care and act like you know what is best for this family." I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my cousins, who were now looking at me like I was the villain of the story. They were actually defending him. They were looking at $212,000 of hidden debt and a fraudulent real estate contract, and they were somehow making it my fault. Brittany is a master at reading the room. The moment she realized the family was leaning toward protecting the status quo, she went in for the kill. She collapsed back into her chair, buried her face in her hands, and began to sob hysterically. It was a flawless performance. Her shoulders shook violently, and she wailed loud enough to drown out any remaining logic in the room. "I tried to fix it," Brittany cried, her voice muffled by her hands. "Jamal made a mistake, but we were trying to fix it without worrying Mom and Dad. We were going to pay it all back. But Stella just wants to humiliate us. She has always hated me. She cannot stand that I am happily married and that Mom and Dad rely on me instead of her. She just came here to ruin everything." Jamal immediately wrapped his arms around her, kissing the top of her head and glaring at me with a look of pure triumphant malice. "See what you did?" he yelled, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You broke your sister's heart. You are a cold, calculated machine, Stella. You do not care about this family at all. You just care about being right." I ignored them both and turned all of my attention to the only person whose opinion actually mattered. I looked at my mother. "Mom," I pleaded, my voice softening. "You have to see what they are doing. You have to look at the paperwork. They manipulated Dad into signing away his rights, and now they are taking the house. Please, Mom, you have to stand up to them." My mother slowly raised her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was no realization or gratitude in her expression. There was only a deep, simmering resentment. She looked at the scattered bank documents, then looked at Brittany crying in Jamal's arms, and finally she looked at me. The hostility in her eyes took my breath away. "How dare you?" My mother whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you come into this house uninvited on Thanksgiving Day and do this to your sister?" "Mom," I said, taking a step toward her, "I am trying to protect you." "Protect me!" she screamed, slamming her hands down on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "You do not know the first thing about protecting me. Where were you when your father wandered out of the house at 2 in the morning last month? Where were you when I spent 3 hours crying on the bathroom floor because I could not remember his medication schedule? Brittany was here. Jamal was here. They are the ones holding this family together while you sit in your high-rise office judging us." I felt a hard lump form in my throat. "I bought you the beach house so you could hire in home care," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of her betrayal. "I offered to pay for full-time nursing staff. You told me you did not want strangers in the house. Because I wanted my daughter," she yelled back, tears streaming down her face. And Brittany stepped up. "She is doing the best she can. So what if Jamal made a financial mistake? We are family. We forgive each other. We help each other. We do not hire private investigators to dig up dirt and throw it in each other's faces over a holiday dinner." "You are cruel, Stella. You have a cold, empty heart." I stood completely paralyzed. I had brought her undeniable proof that her golden child was actively stealing her entire life savings and rendering her homeless. But she did not care. The illusion of her perfect family, the comfort of Brittany's false devotion, was far more important to her than the harsh reality of her own financial ruin. She was willing to go down with the ship as long as Brittany was holding her hand. My father shifted in his recliner in the other room, completely oblivious to the war zone in the dining room. He clapped his hands together and asked if it was time for pie yet. The innocence in his voice broke whatever was left of my heart. My mother pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "Get out!" she commanded, her voice dropping to a low, deadly pitch. "Get your papers, get your bag, and get out of my house. Do not ever speak to your sister like this again. And do not bother coming back until you are ready to get on your knees and apologize to Jamal for ruining this holiday." I looked at the faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Not a single person spoke up in my defense. Not a single person questioned the fraudulent real estate listing. They all just watched me with varying degrees of anger and impatience, waiting for the troublemaker to leave so they could go back to eating their turkey and pretending everything was fine. I did not cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I slowly reached out and gathered up the bank statements, the debt collection notices, and the real estate contract. I tapped the stack of papers against the wooden table to straighten them, slid them back into my manila folder, and tucked it neatly under my arm. "I will go," I said quietly, looking my mother directly in the eyes. "But when the bank comes to foreclose on this house, and when Jamal packs his bags and leaves Brittany to face the federal fraud charges alone, do not call me. I tried to save you. Remember this moment when you lose everything." I turned my back on my family and walked out of the dining room. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet and walked out the front door, stepping into the crisp November air. The emotional betrayal was absolute and complete. My own mother had chosen the comfort of a lie over the safety of the truth. But as I walked down the driveway toward my car, I knew this was not the end of the war. It was just the end of my mercy. The cold November air hit my face the second I stepped out of my parents' front door. Behind me, the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing away the warmth, the smell of roasted turkey, and the toxic delusion my family had chosen over the truth. I pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders and began walking down the long concrete driveway toward my car. My chest felt tight, a suffocating mixture of profound grief and boiling anger. I had handed them the absolute truth on a silver platter. I had shown my mother the exact financial documents proving that my sister and her husband were actively destroying their lives to cover a massive $212,000 debt. But instead of waking up, my mother had ordered me out of the house. She had chosen Brittany's fake tears over my undeniable facts. As I reached for the handle of my car door, I heard the sharp, heavy crunch of footsteps on the gravel behind me. I did not even have to turn around to know who it was. The heavy, arrogant stride was unmistakable. Running away so soon, Stella Jamal called out into the dark evening air. His voice was no longer trembling with the manufactured panic he had displayed inside the dining room. It was smooth, deep, and dripping with absolute venom. I slowly turned around and leaned against the driver's side door of my car. Jamal was walking down the driveway, completely leaving the protective, loving husband character behind. The fake nice guy mask had completely slipped off his face. In the dim light of the street lamps, he looked exactly like what he truly was, a desperate, manipulative predator who thought he had just cornered his prey. "I am not running anywhere, Jamal," I said calmly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I just refuse to sit at a table with a man who is actively stealing from a sick old man to pay off his crypto loan sharks." Jamal let out a loud, echoing laugh. It was a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the quiet suburban neighborhood. He stopped a few feet away from me, shoving his hands into the pockets of his expensive cashmere sweater. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "You really think you are something special? Do you not?" Jamal sneered, taking another step closer so his tall frame towered over me. "You think because you wear cheap corporate suits and push spreadsheets around in Atlanta, you are somehow smarter than everyone else. You brought your little folder of bank statements in there thinking you were going to be the big hero. You thought you were going to drop those papers on the table and watch the whole family turn on me. But you completely miscalculated, Stella." I looked right into his eyes. "I did not miscalculate anything," I replied coldly. "I proved that you are a fraud. My mother might be too deep in denial to admit it right now, but the documents do not lie. You are completely bankrupt, Jamal. You are drowning in debt, and you are using my parents as a life raft." Jamal grinned a wide, terrifying smile that showed all of his teeth. "You just do not get it, do you?" he whispered, leaning in closer. "It does not matter what your little papers say. It does not matter what the truth is. All that matters is who controls the narrative. And right now, I control your mother. Brittany controls your mother. We spent the last 2 years holding their hands, listening to their boring stories, and playing the devoted children while you were off building your precious auditing career. We put in the work, Stella, and now we are cashing in the chips." He pulled his hands out of his pockets and crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself up to look as intimidating as possible. "You are an auditor," he mocked, practically spitting the word out. "You spend your life looking at the past, trying to find mistakes that already happened. But I am a visionary. I look at the future. I saw a $500,000 asset sitting right in front of me and I took it. That is what real men do. They take what they want, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me." "You are going to federal prison if you try to sell that beach house," I warned him, keeping my expression entirely blank. "I am giving you one last chance to walk away, Jamal. If you proceed with this sale, it is not just a family dispute anymore. It is a crime." Jamal threw his head back and laughed again, even louder this time. "A crime," he repeated, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Oh, Stella, you are so naive. Do you really think I would have initiated the sale if I was not absolutely sure I had all my bases covered? I am not stupid. I knew you would try to interfere. That is why I expedited the entire process." He stepped so close to me that I could smell the expensive cologne he had bought with my father's stolen credit card. "Let me break it down for you, since you love numbers so much," he said, his voice dropping to a low, triumphant whisper. "We signed the listing agreement 3 days ago. Caroline, our amazing realtor, found a cash buyer within 24 hours. A wealthy investor from New York who wants to flip the property and does not care about inspections or appraisals. He wired the earnest money yesterday." I kept my face perfectly still, refusing to give him any reaction. "And here is the best part," Jamal continued, his eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "The title company has already processed the paperwork. They ran the deed history, they verified the power of attorney, and they cleared everything. We are entirely green-lit. The buyer has the remaining $500,000 sitting in an escrow account right now, just waiting for my wife to sign on the dotted line." He reached out and tapped the roof of my car with his knuckles, a final condescending gesture. "We close on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, he announced, savoring every single syllable. "Monday morning, Stella. In less than 72 hours, that house will legally belong to someone else. The money will be wired directly into a new bank account that only Brittany and I can access. I will pay off my business debts, we will move your parents into a state-funded facility, and you will never see a single dime of that equity." I stared at him, my mind racing. He was so incredibly arrogant. He was so utterly convinced of his own brilliance that he had not even bothered to look beneath the surface of the title report. He had seen the power of attorney, seen my parents' names on the life estate, and assumed he had the keys to the castle. He had absolutely no idea about the blind limited liability company holding the actual deed. He had no idea he was walking straight into a trap. "You are out of time, Stella," Jamal whispered, stepping back and looking at me with ultimate victory. "And you are completely out of options. You played your hand inside that dining room, and you lost. Your own mother threw you out. So go ahead, get in your car, drive back to your lonely little apartment in Atlanta and cry about it, because by the time you wake up on Monday morning, the deal will be done." I did not argue with him. I did not scream or threaten him again. I just looked at him with a cold, dead stare. I reached behind me, pulled the handle of my car door, and opened it. "We will see what happens on Monday morning, Jamal," I said quietly. "Enjoy your turkey." I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and locked it. I started the engine and put the car in drive. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in my rearview mirror. Jamal was standing in the middle of the driveway watching me leave with a massive, arrogant smirk on his face, genuinely believing he had just defeated me. He thought he had outsmarted the senior financial auditor. He thought he had won the war. But as I merged onto the dark highway, heading straight toward the beach house to prepare for the final showdown, a small, cold smile crept onto my face. He had no idea what was coming for him on Monday at 9 o'clock. And I was going to make sure the impact destroyed his entire life. The sun had barely risen on Friday morning when I pulled into the parking lot of the Coastal Title Company. The Thanksgiving disaster was still burning fresh in my mind. Jamal thought he had delivered the ultimate checkmate when he gloated in the driveway. He thought his aggressive timeline and forged power of attorney had completely boxed me out. But Jamal made the fatal mistake that arrogant scammers always make. He assumed that because the paperwork looked official on the surface, nobody would bother digging deeper. He assumed I would just roll over and cry. But I do not cry over financial fraud. I dissect it. I spent my entire drive back to the Florida coast mentally preparing for this exact moment. I was not walking into this office as a heartbroken sister. I was walking in as a senior financial auditor, and I was about to rip their entire fraudulent transaction apart, piece by piece. The title company was located in a sleek modern building right off the main highway. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors and stepped into the pristine lobby. The air conditioning was freezing, and the room smelled like expensive coffee. There was a receptionist sitting behind a massive desk, but I completely ignored her. My eyes were instantly drawn to the glass-walled conference room down the hallway. Sitting at a large mahogany table surrounded by stacks of real estate documents was Caroline. The ruthless listing agent, who had rudely dismissed me on my parents' front porch, was furiously typing on her laptop, no doubt trying to push the final closing documents through before the weekend. I did not wait to be announced. I marched straight down the hallway, pushed the glass door open, and walked right into the conference room. Caroline jumped in her leather chair, her hands freezing over her keyboard. She looked up and I saw genuine shock register in her eyes. But her professional mask quickly slid back into place. She snapped her laptop shut and stood up. "Stella," she said, her voice dripping with annoyed superiority. "I remember you from the driveway. I am not sure how you got past the front desk, but you cannot be in here. This is a private office, and I am in the middle of preparing highly sensitive closing documents for your parents' property. You need to leave right now before I call security." I did not move a single inch. I stepped further into the room and dropped my leather bag onto the table with a loud thud. "I am not leaving, Caroline," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And you are not preparing closing documents. You are facilitating federal wire fraud. I suggest you sit back down and listen very carefully to what I have to say, because your real estate license is currently hanging by a very thin thread." Caroline's face flushed bright red with anger. She slammed her hands down on the table, leaning forward aggressively. "How dare you walk into my office and threaten me?" she hissed, dropping the polite professional tone entirely. "You are a bitter, estranged daughter who is upset that she is not getting a cut of the sale. Jamal warned me about you. He told me you would try to cause a scene because you are jealous of the fact that your sister holds the power of attorney. Well, let me make this crystal clear for you. I do not care about your family drama. I care about legally binding contracts, and the contract I hold gives Jamal and Brittany the absolute right to sell that house." She reached for the office phone sitting in the center of the table. "I am calling the police," she announced, her finger hovering over the dial pad. "I am having you arrested for trespassing and harassment. You can explain your ridiculous fraud theories to the local cops while they put you in the back of a squad car." I stared at her, completely unfazed. "Go ahead and call them, Caroline," I challenged, crossing my arms over my chest. "Call the police right now. Ask them to send their financial crimes unit, because when they get here, I am going to show them exactly how you neglected your fiduciary duty. I am going to show them how you failed to perform a basic due diligence check on a $500,000 cash transaction. You let the promise of a fast, massive commission blind you to the fact that your clients do not actually own the property they are trying to sell." Caroline hesitated. Her finger hovered over the phone, but she did not press the buttons. The absolute certainty in my voice had finally pierced through her arrogant armor. "What are you talking about?" Caroline demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its confidence. "The deed is clear. The title company pulled the preliminary report yesterday. The property is deeded to Richard and Diane. Brittany has the power of attorney. Just because a piece of paper has a blue stamp on it does not mean it is flawless," I replied coldly. "You looked at the surface, Caroline. You saw two elderly people and a desperate couple pushing for a fast cash sale, and you saw dollar signs. But you did not verify the chain of title." Before Caroline could respond, the heavy glass door of the conference room opened again. A middle-aged woman wearing a conservative navy suit walked in, holding a thick file folder. She stopped dead in her tracks, looking back and forth between me and Caroline. "Is there a problem here, Caroline?" the woman asked cautiously. "I am ready to process the escrow instructions for the Monday closing." I turned my attention entirely to the new woman. "Are you the senior escrow officer handling this transaction?" I asked, stepping toward her. "I need you to please pull the complete deed history right now, and I will absolutely not leave until you do." The room was incredibly tense. Caroline stood at the head of the long conference table, her face flushed with extreme anger, demanding that I be thrown out of the building immediately. But the senior escrow officer did not call security. She looked at my firm posture, then looked down at the thick file folder in her hands, and finally walked over to the computer terminal in the corner of the room. "I appreciate your concern, Caroline," the escrow officer said smoothly. "But if there is a dispute regarding the chain of title, I am legally obligated to review the recorded documents before we proceed with dispersing $500,000 in escrow funds. Caroline let out a loud, dramatic sigh and crossed her arms over her chest. Fine, she snapped, glaring at me. Pull the file, pull the preliminary title report. It clearly says Richard and Diane are the grantees. This woman is wasting our time because she is bitter. I did not argue with Caroline. I simply unzipped my leather bag, pulled out my silver laptop, and set it down on the polished mahogany table. I opened the screen and typed in my password. The escrow officer began clicking her mouse, her eyes scanning the digital public records with intense focus. Look, Caroline said, pointing a manicured finger at the officer's monitor. Right there. The power of attorney is recorded. Brittany is the executor. She has the legal right to liquidate the asset. Jamal signed the listing agreement on her behalf. It is an open and shut case. I smiled. It was the very first genuine smile I had felt in 2 entire weeks. You are looking at the surface documents, Caroline, I said, calmly pulling up a secured file on my own screen. You saw my parents' names on the tax bill and the utility accounts, and you saw the power of attorney. You assume they owned the property outright. But if you actually read the deed history, you will see a specific legal clause attached to their names. The escrow officer leaned closer to her monitor, her brow furrowed in confusion. Wait a minute, she muttered, highlighting a section of the text on her screen. This is not a standard warranty deed. This is a life estate deed. Exactly, I said, turning my laptop around so Caroline could see the screen. When I bought this $547,000 house, 2 years ago, I knew exactly how manipulative my sister was. I knew Jamal was constantly looking for a quick payout to fund his failing businesses. I knew that if I handed my parents a clear deed to a massive asset, they would eventually be bullied or tricked into signing it away. So I took steps to protect them from their own naive generosity. I did not put the house in their names. Caroline stared at my screen, her mouth slightly open. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice losing all of its previous arrogance. The tax records show their names. They hold a life estate, I explained slowly, breaking it down so even she could understand. A life estate means they have the legal right to live in the house, use the property, and claim homestead exemptions for the rest of their natural lives. But they do not own the underlying equity. They do not have the right to sell it, mortgage it, or transfer it. And because my father does not own the property, the power of attorney my sister forced him to sign is completely worthless here. She cannot sell an asset that does not belong to him. The escrow officer nodded slowly, her eyes wide as she read the rest of the document. She is right, Caroline, the officer said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. Richard and Diane are only the life tenants. The actual owner of the property, the remainder man, is a limited liability company called Coastal Horizon Holdings. Caroline frantically pulled out her cell phone. Well, then we will just get the limited liability company to sign off on the sale, she said desperately. Jamal told me they had full control over everything. I will call him right now and tell him to send over the corporate operating agreement. You do not need to call him, I said quietly. I tapped the keyboard of my laptop, bringing up the official state registry for Coastal Horizon Holdings. It is a blind, limited liability company acting as an irrevocable trust. It was specifically designed to shield the property from aggressive creditors, unknown scammers, and greedy family members looking for a quick payday. I registered it in Delaware to maintain absolute privacy and maximum legal protection. Jamal and Brittany have absolutely no idea it even exists. They saw a house and assumed they could take it. I pushed my laptop directly in front of Caroline. Look at the operating agreement, Caroline, I commanded. Look at the authorized signatories. Caroline leaned over the table. Her eyes scanned the corporate documents. The color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. The only name on the operating agreement, the sole managing member with absolute authority over the limited liability company and the property, was me. Stella. I bought the house, I said, letting the reality crush her hopes of a massive commission. I structured the trust. I own the limited liability company. which means Caroline, I own the house. My sister and her husband just signed a legally binding real estate contract, accepted earnest money, and initiated a closing process to sell a piece of real estate they literally do not own. The room was completely silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. The escrow officer stepped away from the computer, looking at Caroline with a mixture of shock and professional horror. Caroline dropped her cell phone onto the table. Her hands were shaking. She suddenly realized the magnitude of what she had just done. By rushing the sale and failing to verify the trust documents, she had actively participated in a fraudulent real estate transaction. "You are telling me," Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible, "that the listing agreement I have is completely invalid." "It is worse than invalid, Caroline," I replied coldly. "It is a federal crime. Jamal and Brittany crossed state lines with forged intent. And you are holding the smoking gun. They thought they had outsmarted me with a shady power of attorney. But they just walked straight into an immovable concrete wall. And now I am the only one who gets to decide exactly how hard the final impact is going to be for everyone involved in this massive financial scam." The senior escrow officer sat frozen in her chair, staring back and forth between my computer screen and the thick file folder resting on her lap. Caroline looked like she was about to pass out. Her breathing was shallow, and her perfectly manicured hands were gripping the edge of the mahogany conference table so hard her knuckles were completely white. She knew exactly what it meant if the listing agreement she had pushed through was legally invalid. It meant her massive commission was gone, her real estate license was in severe jeopardy, and she was potentially facing a massive civil lawsuit for failing to perform basic due diligence on a major transaction. But as I stood there watching them panic, a sudden terrifying thought crossed my mind. The title company is a highly regulated institution. They do not just take a realtor's word for it when millions of dollars are on the line. They have mandatory compliance checklists. They have strict underwriting guidelines. For this transaction to have progressed this far, for an all-cash buyer to have already wired earnest money into an escrow account, someone had to have provided the title company with corporate documents. "Can I see the rest of the file?" I asked the escrow officer, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I need to see exactly what Jamal and Brittany submitted to clear the title search." The escrow officer swallowed hard and nodded. She opened the heavy folder and pulled out a stapled packet of papers. She slid it across the table toward me. I picked it up and began to read. It was a copy of the Limited Liability Company operating agreement, but it was not the real one I had drafted 2 years ago. This was a completely fabricated document. Jamal had gone online, found a generic corporate template, and filled it in. He had listed my father as the primary managing member and himself as a designated corporate officer. But that was not the worst part. I flipped to the second page, which was a corporate resolution authorizing the immediate sale of the Florida beach house. At the bottom of the page, right next to the date, was my signature. It was a clumsy, heavily traced forgery of my name, signing away all of my rights to the company and giving Jamal full permission to liquidate the asset. Jamal had not just manipulated a sick old man. He had actively forged my signature on a corporate document to bypass the title company underwriting department. I stared at my forged signature for a long time. The sheer audacity of it made the blood pound in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the packet of papers right into Caroline's face and demand that the escrow officer call the police this very second. My first instinct was to burn the whole deal down right here in this conference room to protect my property and stop Jamal from getting another inch closer to my parents' money. But then my professional auditor brain clicked into gear. I spend my entire life analyzing risk, evaluating consequences, and anticipating the legal maneuvers of financial criminals. I looked at the situation with absolute cold logic. If I blow the whistle right now, the escrow officer will immediately cancel the transaction. The buyer will get his earnest money back. The title company will reject the deed transfer. And what will happen to Jamal and Brittany? Absolutely nothing. They will get a slap on the wrist. Jamal will claim he misunderstood the corporate structure. Brittany will cry and say she was just trying to follow her father's wishes. Local police rarely want to get involved in what looks like a messy family dispute over a piece of property. The prosecutor would likely decline to press charges, writing it off as a civil matter. Jamal would walk away completely free, and he would just find another way to bleed my parents dry. I realized that stopping the sale now was the worst possible thing I could do. To truly stop them, I needed a catastrophic legal impact. I needed a crime so severe that no amount of crying or family excuses could save them. If they forged a document, that is a local issue. But if they actually sit down at a closing table, sign the final settlement statements, and attempt to initiate a wire transfer of $547,000 across state lines using a fraudulent corporate identity, it elevates instantly. It becomes federal wire fraud. It becomes identity theft. It becomes a massive felony that carries mandatory prison time. I needed them to sit at that closing table. I needed them to think they had won. I slowly closed the file folder and slid it back across the mahogany table to the escrow officer. I looked at Caroline, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, waiting for me to drop the hammer and destroy her career. I forced the muscles in my face to relax. I let out a soft sigh and offered Caroline a polite, apologetic smile. You know what I said, keeping my tone light and completely conversational. I think there has been a massive misunderstanding on my part. Caroline blinked clearly, not comprehending what I was doing. Excuse me? She asked, her voice shaking. I looked at the forged signature again and nodded. I am so sorry for barging in here and causing a scene. I continued packing my laptop back into my leather bag. Jamal and I have not been communicating very well lately. Looking at these documents, I realize he actually did discuss this corporate resolution with me a few weeks ago. I completely forgot that we had already authorized this transfer to help my parents transition into their new care facility. The paperwork you have is absolutely correct. The senior escrow officer looked incredibly confused. She looked at the real operating agreement on her computer screen, and then at the forged one in her folder. So, you are saying we are clear to proceed? She asked hesitantly. I zipped my bag shut and slung it over my shoulder. Yes, I said confidently. You are completely clear to proceed. The limited liability company authorizes the sale. Please make sure everything is ready for the closing on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Jamal and Brittany are very eager to finalize this transaction, and I would hate to stand in their way. Caroline let out a massive breath of relief, her posture instantly relaxing. Her arrogant smirk slowly crept back onto her face. Well, she said smoothly, smoothing down her tailored skirt, I am glad we could clear up this little family miscommunication. I will see everyone at the closing table on Monday. I smiled right back at her. You certainly will. Caroline, I said, have a wonderful weekend. I turned around and walked out of the conference room, leaving them completely unaware of the massive trap I had just set. The bait was officially on the hook. Jamal thought he was a visionary entrepreneur taking what he wanted. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. I walked out of the cool lobby and back into the blazing Florida sun, my heart beating with a steady, lethal rhythm. Jamal had spent his entire adult life taking shortcuts, leaving a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts in his wake. He had always relied on his smooth-talking charm and my sister's protective shield to escape the consequences of his actions. But charm cannot save you from a federal indictment. A forged signature on a real estate closing document is a permanent, undeniable paper trail. I got into my car and started the engine, feeling a profound sense of clarity. I was not just protecting my parents anymore. I was surgically removing a parasite from our family tree. All I had to do now was wait for Monday morning, let them sign their names on the dotted line, and watch the entire illusion of their perfect life burn to the ground. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon sitting in my hotel room. I had booked a suite just a few miles away from the beach house. After successfully setting the trap at the title company, I needed to stay close by. I knew Jamal and Brittany would be scrambling to finalize their plans for the Monday morning closing. The sun had just started to set, casting long orange shadows across the room when my cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. The caller identification flashed with my mother's name. Part of me hesitated to answer. Just 24 hours ago, she had screamed at me and kicked me out of her house on Thanksgiving Day. I assumed she was calling to demand another apology or to yell at me for causing trouble at the title company. But the moment I answered the phone, I did not hear anger. I heard pure hysterical sobbing. "Mom," I said, sitting straight up on the edge of the bed. "Mom, what is wrong? Take a deep breath and tell me what is happening." It took her nearly a full minute to form a coherent sentence. When she finally spoke, her voice was high-pitched and shaking with absolute terror. "Stella," she gasped. "They threw it all away. They threw everything away." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "Who threw what away?" I asked, pressing the phone tightly against my ear. "Brittany and Jamal," my mother cried. "They showed up at the beach house 2 hours ago with a massive commercial junk removal truck. They told us the cash buyer wanted to do a final walkthrough this weekend, and the house had to be completely empty and professionally staged. They did not even let your father finish eating his lunch, Stella. Jamal just started grabbing our furniture and tossing it out the front door. They threw away the couch you bought us. They threw away the dining table. They even threw away the boxes of family photo albums that I had packed in the hallway. They treated our entire life like it was garbage." My grip on the phone tightened so hard my knuckles popped. "Where are you right now?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Are you still at the house?" "No," my mother sobbed heavily. "Jamal hired a locksmith. They changed all the locks right in front of us while the junk crew was tossing our things into a dumpster. When I begged Brittany to let us stay just through the weekend, she rolled her eyes and said we were standing in the way of progress. She told me I was being ungrateful. Then Jamal put us in his car and drove us away." "Where did they take you?" I asked, standing up and grabbing my car keys from the table. My mother choked back another sob and gave me the name of a motel. It was a notoriously run-down, sketchy roadside motel located right off the main interstate highway. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour. A place known for drug activity and police raids. It was absolutely no place for an elderly couple, especially a man suffering from early-stage dementia. "I am on my way," I told her. "Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me." I ran out of my hotel room and sprinted to my car. The drive to the highway took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. When I finally pulled into the crumbling asphalt parking lot of the motel, my stomach turned. The neon sign above the office was flickering and half burnt out. There were sketchy individuals lingering on the second-floor balcony, smoking and staring at my car. The entire place smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap bleach. I parked right in front of room 112 and pounded on the chipped wooden door. I heard the heavy deadbolt click, and the door slowly creaked open. My mother stood there, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying, and her clothes were completely wrinkled. I stepped inside the dark, damp room and quickly locked the door behind me. The carpet was stained and the wallpaper was peeling in the corners. There was a single cockroach crawling up the wall near the bathroom. Sitting on the edge of a stained bedspread was my father. He was clutching a single plastic grocery bag in his lap. It was the only thing my mother had managed to grab before Jamal shoved them out of their own home. My father looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. He did not know where he was. He was trembling, shaking like a frightened child in the cold air conditioning of the horrible room. "Stella," my father whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did Jamal take my shoes? I cannot find my shoes." I looked down and realized my father was only wearing his socks. In their ruthless rush to clear the house and secure their payday, Jamal and Brittany had literally forced my father out the door without his shoes. The absolute cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. I walked over and knelt in front of my father, taking his cold, shaking hands in mine. I promised him everything was going to be okay. My mother collapsed onto the other bed, burying her face in her hands. "I am so sorry, Stella," she wailed, her voice echoing in the miserable little room. "I am so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything, and I did not listen to you. I thought Brittany was trying to help us. I thought she loved us. But she looked at me today like I was absolutely nothing. She threw us away just like the furniture. I stood up and walked over to my mother. I did not say I told you so. I did not bring up the Thanksgiving dinner or the terrible things she had said to me just yesterday. The illusion of her perfect golden child had been brutally, permanently shattered. She was finally seeing Brittany for exactly who she was. A cold, greedy manipulator who would gladly toss her own parents into a roach-infested motel if it meant securing a $500,000 check. I wrapped my arms around my mother and let her cry into my shoulder. But as I held her, I was not feeling sad anymore. The grief was completely gone. In its place was a sharp-focused and terrifyingly calm anger. Brittany and Jamal had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had taken my parents' dignity. They had stripped them of their safety and thrown them to the wolves just to cover up their own pathetic financial failures. "We are leaving right now," I told my mother, pulling her up from the bed. "I am taking you to my hotel. You are going to take a warm shower, and you are going to sleep in a clean, safe bed. And then we are going to fix this." As I helped my parents out of that miserable motel room and guided them into the safety of my car, my mind was racing with preparations. The bait was set at the title company. The trap was fully armed. But after seeing my father sitting in his socks in a roach-infested room, I knew I could not just let them walk into the federal trap on Monday. I needed to tighten the noose. I needed to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, it would crush every single escape route Jamal and Brittany thought they had. The emotional devastation of this Friday night was the final fuel I needed. I was no longer just preparing for a legal dispute. I was preparing for an absolute war. And I was going to completely obliterate them. I drove my parents back to my hotel in complete silence. The emotional toll had completely drained them. I booked an adjoining room so they could have their own space, but left the connecting door open. My mother took a hot shower and washed the smell of that roadside motel off her skin. I ordered room service and made sure they ate before tucking them into bed. My father fell asleep almost instantly, clutching a pillow to his chest. My mother stayed awake, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under. Once I was sure they were asleep, I walked back to my suite. I sat down at the glass desk and opened my laptop, connecting to the secure network I use for my auditing firm. My mind was sharp, cold, and incredibly focused. Jamal and Brittany had hired a commercial junk removal crew and a locksmith on a Friday afternoon. Those services are incredibly expensive at the last minute. I knew my parents' accounts were drained, so Jamal had found cash somewhere else. When you are an auditor, you know exactly where to look for hidden money. I bypassed the standard credit reports and logged directly into the state and county public records databases. I started pulling every civil court docket and property lien associated with Jamal's name. What I found on Thanksgiving was a massive $212,000 debt from a failed cryptocurrency venture. But as my eyes scanned the new digital records flooding my screen, I realized that crypto debt was just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. There was a brand new filing registered 2 days ago. It was a bridge loan recorded by a shadow limited liability company known for predatory hard money lending. Hard money lenders do not care about your credit score or your employment history. They do not do background checks. They only care about collateral. They lend fast cash at astronomically high interest rates to desperate people who cannot get money anywhere else. And if you do not pay them back exactly on time, they do not just send a polite collection letter. They send violent people to collect. I opened the scanned document and felt my stomach drop to the floor. Jamal had taken out a $150,000 short-term bridge loan, and the collateral he listed was my beach house. My hands were shaking as I read the brutal terms of the lending contract. Jamal promised these loan sharks that the property was unencumbered and that he had full legal authority to leverage it. He took the $150,000 in cash to pay off his most aggressive crypto creditors and to fund the rapid eviction of my parents. The terms of the bridge loan stated that the entire principal amount plus a 30% interest fee was due in a single balloon payment the moment the house sold. Jamal had explicitly listed the Monday morning closing date as the absolute deadline for repayment. He was planning to take the $547,000 from the cash buyer, pay off the loan sharks immediately, and pocket the rest. The full terrifying reality of the situation crashed over me. When I walked into the title company that morning, I thought I was just stopping a fraudulent real estate transaction. I thought the worst-case scenario was Jamal going to prison for wire fraud. But this discovery completely changed the landscape. If I let the Monday closing proceed and then drop the legal hammer to invalidate the sale, the cash buyer gets his escrow money back. The title company will freeze the transaction. But the hard money lenders will not care about the legal technicalities of my irrevocable trust. They gave Jamal cold, hard cash based on a fraudulent promise. When Monday afternoon rolls around and Jamal does not have their money, violent debt collectors are going to come looking for him. The most terrifying part was that the loan sharks had the exact address of the beach house. They believed the property was their legal collateral. When Jamal inevitably defaults on Monday, they might show up at the house to secure their investment. If my parents had still been living there when those violent men arrived, I do not even want to think about what could have happened. Jamal and Brittany had recklessly placed my elderly parents in the direct crosshairs of violent criminals just to cover up their own pathetic mistakes. The level of sociopathic greed required to put your own family in physical danger was beyond anything I had ever encountered in my entire career. They were completely out of control. I closed the digital file and leaned back, staring into the dark hotel room. The stakes were no longer just financial. They were a matter of absolute physical safety. I could not just wait for Monday morning and handle this in a sterile conference room. The beach house was currently sitting empty, staged for a fake buyer, and vulnerable to anyone Jamal had given the address to. I needed to act immediately to secure the property and protect my family from the dangerous element Jamal had invited into our lives. The trap at the title company was perfectly set, but now I had to build an impenetrable fortress around my own home. I grabbed my phone and began searching for local private security firms. The physical battle was just beginning. I looked at the digital clock in the corner of my laptop screen. It was exactly 3:45 in the afternoon. The county clerk office closed promptly at 5 o'clock for the weekend. If I wanted to stop the fraudulent sale and protect my parents from the violent loan sharks Jamal had invited into our lives, I had exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes to file the most powerful legal document in my arsenal. I quickly closed my laptop, shoved it into my leather tote bag, and quietly slipped out of the hotel suite, making sure not to wake my exhausted parents, who were finally sleeping in the next room. I practically sprinted through the carpeted hotel lobby and jumped into my car. The drive to the county courthouse usually took 20 minutes, but Friday afternoon traffic along the Florida coast was notoriously brutal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. Every single red light felt like a personal insult as the clock ticked closer to the deadline. As I navigated through the bumper-to-bumper traffic, I went over the legal strategy in my head. I knew I could not just walk into the title company on Monday morning and yell about a forged document. That would just create a chaotic he said she said situation. I needed an ironclad government-enforced blockade. In the financial auditing and commercial real estate world, there is a specific legal tool designed for exactly this type of emergency. It is called a lis pendens. It is a Latin legal term that translates directly to pending litigation. When you file a lis pendens against a property, you are officially notifying the public, the government, and any potential buyers that the ownership of the property is currently under a severe active legal dispute. It acts like a massive glowing red stop sign attached directly to the deed. Once that document is recorded in the county public registry system, it completely clouds the title. No title insurance company in the country will ever underwrite a policy on a clouded title. And without title insurance, no legitimate buyer will ever close a deal. More importantly, the title company legally cannot disperse the escrow funds if the title is suddenly flagged. I needed to drop that flag right now. I pulled into the massive concrete parking structure of the county courthouse at 4:35. I abandoned my car in the very first available spot I could find and sprinted toward the main entrance. I had to go through the security checkpoints, emptying my pockets and putting my bag through the metal detectors, taking precious minutes away from my deadline. By the time I reached the third floor where the county recorder office was located, it was 4:48. The long marble hallway was mostly empty, echoing loudly with the sound of my heels hitting the polished floor. I burst through the heavy wooden doors of the recorder's office, panting slightly from the run. There was only one clerk left at the long front counter. She was already shutting down her computer monitor and organizing her desk to leave for the weekend. "Excuse me," I called out, rushing up to the thick glass partition that separated the public from the staff. "I need to file an emergency notice of pending litigation on a residential property right now." The clerk, a weary-looking woman with thick-framed glasses, looked up at the wall clock and let out a heavy, annoyed sigh. "We close in 10 minutes, honey," she said, tapping her fingernail against the closed sign resting on the glass. "The system takes time to process new property filings. You are going to have to come back on Monday morning, when we open our doors at 8. I shook my head adamantly, pulling the prepared legal documents out of my bag and sliding them through the small metal slot at the bottom of the glass. "If I wait until Monday morning, a massive federal wire fraud will take place," I told her, looking directly into her eyes with absolute unwavering urgency. "My elderly parents will lose their home, and violent debt collectors will be involved. I am a senior financial auditor. I have all the paperwork perfectly filled out. I have the corporate operating agreement proving I am the sole managing member of the trust that owns the property. I just need you to stamp this document and enter it into the public registry before you lock that door." The clerk looked at my desperate expression and then looked down at the thick stack of papers. She let out another heavy sigh, but she reached over and turned her computer monitor back on. She reviewed the limited liability company documents, verified my state identification, and checked the parcel number of the beach house against the county database. For 5 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the quiet office was the rapid clicking of her keyboard. I watched the digital clock on the wall tick down mercilessly. 4:56, 4:57, 4:58. My heart was pounding in my throat. Finally, at exactly 4:59, she picked up her heavy red ink stamp and pressed it down hard onto the front page of my filing. The loud thud echoed through the room like a gavel slamming down. "It is recorded," she said, handing me the carbon copy through the slot. "The title is officially frozen. Have a good weekend." I took the paper from her, feeling a massive wave of pure adrenaline and relief wash over my entire body. I thanked her profusely and walked out of the courthouse. As I stepped back into the warm Florida evening air, the beautiful reality of what I had just accomplished settled into my bones. The snare was officially pulled tight. Jamal and Brittany could put on their best designer clothes on Monday morning. They could sit in that fancy conference room, drink expensive champagne, and sign all the fraudulent papers they wanted. The cash buyer could even initiate the wire transfer of the $547,000 into the escrow account. But the moment the escrow officer tries to officially record the deed, transfer the county computer system will flag the lease pendants. The entire transaction will hit a solid concrete wall. The money will be permanently frozen in escrow, and the house will remain legally mine. Jamal had promised the loan sharks they would be paid by Monday afternoon. He had staked his entire life and my parents' safety on a deal that was now legally impossible to complete. The legal trap was locked, and now I just had to secure the physical property before the storm hit. I woke up early on Saturday morning in my hotel suite. The digital clock on the nightstand read 6:30. I quietly opened the connecting door and peeked into the adjoining room to check on my parents, who were resting. They were both still fast asleep, safely tucked into their beds. The nightmare of the previous day had completely exhausted them. I walked over to the window, looking out at the calm ocean. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that the legal trap I set at the county courthouse was actively working. But my moment of peace was violently interrupted by the sharp buzzing of my cell phone resting on the glass desk. I picked it up and saw a text message notification from my sister Brittany. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. There was no greeting. There was just a single photograph and a terrifying block of text. The picture was of my sweet senior rescue dog, Cooper. I had adopted Cooper 5 years ago, and he was my absolute best friend. Because I traveled so much for corporate audits, Cooper spent a lot of time living at the beach house with my parents. When Jamal and Brittany ruthlessly kicked my parents out of the house on Friday afternoon, they had completely ignored Cooper. They left him locked inside the empty house all by himself. Underneath the picture of my frightened dog, Brittany had typed a chilling message. She said she had just logged into the title company online portal to check the status of the Monday closing. The system was showing a massive red flag on the property deed indicating an active legal dispute. Brittany was furious. She accused me of sabotaging her life. Then she laid down her ultimatum. She told me she was heading over to the beach house right now. If I did not immediately call the title company and remove whatever legal block I had placed on the property, she was going to put Cooper in her car and drive him straight to the county animal control facility. She explicitly pointed out that the facility was notoriously overcrowded and classified as a high-kill shelter. She gave me exactly 1 hour to fix the title portal, or my dog would be gone forever. A wave of absolute rage washed over me. Dumping my parents at a roach-infested motel was unforgivable, but using an innocent animal as leverage to force a federal wire fraud was a level of evil I could barely comprehend. Jamal and Brittany were entirely out of control, acting like cornered, desperate animals themselves. They thought threatening the one creature I loved more than anything would force me to surrender. I did not reply to her text message because I refused to play games. I quickly put on my clothes, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted out of the hotel. I jumped into my car and drove straight to the nearest local hardware store. I walked down the tool aisle, grabbed a heavy steel sledgehammer, and paid for it in cash. The drive to the beach house took less than 15 minutes, but my foot was pressing the gas pedal entirely to the floor the whole way. When I pulled into the driveway, Brittany's car was not there yet. I grabbed the sledgehammer from the passenger seat and marched straight up to the front porch. Jamal had installed a brand new expensive digital smart lock on the front door to keep us out. I did not waste any time trying to guess the code. I raised the heavy steel sledgehammer over my head and swung it forward with every single ounce of strength I had in my body. The metal slammed into the digital keypad, completely shattering the plastic casing and destroying the locking mechanism. The door swung open and I rushed inside. Cooper was hiding far back under the dark kitchen counter, shaking with fear. I dropped the hammer, fell to my knees, and wrapped my arms around his warm, trembling body. I promised him that nobody would ever hurt him. I gently carried him out to my car and placed him safely in the back seat of the vehicle. Then I pulled out my phone and called a private security firm I had researched the night before. I paid a massive premium to have 2 armed security guards dispatched to the property immediately. When they arrived 10 minutes later, I gave them explicit instructions. I made it very clear that absolutely nobody gets onto the property until Monday morning. Not the greedy realtor, not the loan sharks, and absolutely not my sister. The entire property perimeter was completely secure, and I was finally ready for the final battle. Monday morning finally arrived. The clock on the dashboard of my car read exactly 8:45. I was sitting in the visitor parking lot of the most expensive real estate law firm in the county. Up on the 4th floor inside a massive glass-walled conference room, my sister Brittany and her husband Jamal were already celebrating. I could perfectly picture the scene unfolding up there. They had arrived early, dressed in their most expensive designer clothes, ready to play the roles of the wealthy, successful investors. Caroline, their ruthless real estate agent, was probably pouring expensive champagne into crystal flutes, toasting to her massive commission. Sitting across from them would be the cash buyer, a wealthy out-of-town investor who thought he was getting a steal on a $500,000 beach house. And somewhere in that room, hovering near the door, was likely a representative for the hard money lenders waiting to collect the $150,000 predatory bridge loan Jamal had secretly taken out against my property. They all thought the deal was done. They thought they had successfully bypassed me by using the fraudulent power of attorney and the forged corporate documents. They assumed the title company had cleared the deed on Friday afternoon after I walked out of that office, playing the part of the defeated sister. They were just waiting for the clock to strike 9 so the closing attorney could hit the button and wire $547,000 into a bank account that only Jamal and Brittany controlled. But they had no idea that the title was frozen. And they had absolutely no idea who I was bringing with me to the party. Sitting in the passenger seat of my car was David. David was not a family mediator. He was not a friendly local real estate attorney. David was a senior partner at a ruthless corporate litigation firm in Atlanta. He spent his entire career destroying massive corporations in federal court. I had called him on Saturday immediately after rescuing my dog and securing the beach house. I paid him a massive emergency retainer to fly down to Florida first thing Monday morning. David was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, holding a thick black leather briefcase resting on his lap. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Are you ready for this, Stella?" he asked, his voice calm and completely devoid of emotion. "Once we walk through those doors, there is no turning back. This becomes a federal matter immediately." I looked up at the glass windows on the 4th floor. I thought about my father sitting in that roach-infested motel room without his shoes. I thought about my mother crying on the stained bedspread, finally realizing the monster she had raised. "I am more than ready," I told him, putting the car in park. "Let us go completely destroy them." We walked into the lavish lobby of the law firm and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. As we stepped out onto the thick plush carpet, I could actually hear the sound of laughter and clinking glasses echoing down the hallway. We walked straight toward the main conference room. Through the heavy glass doors, I could see them. Jamal was leaning back in a leather chair, looking incredibly smug, sipping champagne. Brittany was smiling brightly, pointing at a stack of settlement statements. Caroline was standing near the head of the mahogany table, looking like she had just won the lottery. It was exactly 8:55, 5 minutes before the wire transfer was scheduled to be authorized. I reached out and grabbed the polished silver handles of the heavy double doors. I pushed them open with so much force they banged loudly against the interior walls of the conference room. The laughter stopped instantly. The room fell into absolute dead silence. Every single head snapped toward the doorway. Jamal lowered his champagne flute, his arrogant smile freezing on his face. Brittany gasped, dropping her silver pen onto the table. But it was Caroline who reacted the most violently. The color completely drained from her face as she recognized me. She remembered the conversation we had on Friday afternoon. She knew exactly what I had warned her about. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jamal shouted, slamming his glass down on the table and standing up. He puffed out his chest, trying to play the intimidating protector. "You are not invited to this closing, Stella. Get out of here right now before I throw you out myself." Caroline completely panicked. "Security!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, waving her hands frantically at the closing attorney who was sitting quietly at the end of the table. "Call building security right now. This woman is a trespasser. She is a disgruntled, estranged family member who is just trying to cause a scene and ruin this transaction. Remove her immediately so we can finalize the wire transfer." I did not even blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped into the room and let David walk past me. David stepped right up to the edge of the massive mahogany conference table. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer to shake anyone's hand. He reached into his thick black leather briefcase, pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents, and slammed them down onto the table with a deafening crack. The sound echoed through the room, making Caroline physically jump backward. "Nobody is calling security," David announced, his deep, authoritative voice commanding absolute obedience from every single person in the room. "And nobody is authorizing a wire transfer today. I represent the sole legal owner of the property located at the center of this transaction. My client is serving you with an immediate cease and desist order regarding the fraudulent sale of her asset." The closing attorney, a distinguished older man in a navy suit, quickly stood up and reached for the documents David had just slammed down. "Excuse me," the closing attorney said, looking incredibly alarmed. The title company cleared this deed on Friday. We have a verified power of attorney and a corporate resolution authorizing the sale. David let out a cold, sharp laugh that sent shivers down my spine. The documents you have are completely forged, he stated, pointing directly at Jamal and Brittany, who were now standing completely frozen in terror. The individuals sitting at this table do not own the property. They have absolutely no legal authority to sell the property, and as of 4:59 on Friday afternoon, there is a government-enforced notice of pending litigation officially recorded on the title. If you transfer a single dollar into this escrow account, David warned them, looking them dead in the eyes, you will be actively participating in a massive federal wire fraud. This closing is officially over. I walked past David and stepped right up to the edge of the mahogany table. My eyes were locked entirely on the closing attorney. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the original certified state-registered operating agreement for Coastal Horizon Holdings. It was printed on thick legal paper and bore the raised golden seal of the Delaware Secretary of State. I dropped it directly in the center of the table, right on top of the fake settlement statements Brittany had been admiring. I suggest you look at the authorized signatories, I said, keeping my voice deadly calm. The document you have on file is a complete fabrication. My sister and her husband downloaded a generic template off the internet and traced my signature at the bottom. The corporate entity that actually owns the property has never authorized a sale. If you process that wire transfer, you will be facilitating a massive federal crime. The closing attorney picked up my certified document. His eyes darted back and forth between the raised golden seal on my paperwork and the cheap photocopy Jamal had provided. All the color instantly drained from his face. He dropped the paper like it was on fire and immediately pushed his keyboard away, taking his hands completely off the computer terminal. I turned my attention to the older man sitting across from Brittany. He was wearing an expensive suit and holding a luxury pen. He was the cash buyer. He looked completely bewildered. "Sir," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "you are about to wire over $500,000 to two people who do not own the house they are trying to sell you. If that money leaves your account today, it will be frozen in a federal investigation for years." The cash buyer did not need to hear another word. The threat of losing his investment to a federal fraud investigation was all it took. He stood up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed to the floor behind him. "This is an absolute outrage," he shouted, grabbing his briefcase and glaring at Caroline. "You told me this was a clean title. I am pulling my escrow funds immediately, and I am reporting your brokerage to the Real Estate Commission." He did not even look back as he stormed out of the conference room, slamming the glass doors behind him. Caroline let out a strangled cry, covering her face with her hands, as her massive commission and her entire career vanished into thin air right in front of her eyes. But the real explosion happened at the back of the room. A tall, muscular man wearing a tight black polo shirt stepped out of the shadows near the window. He was the representative for the hard money lenders. He had been sent there to quietly collect the $150,000 bridge loan Jamal had promised to repay today. He walked slowly toward Jamal, his face dark with absolute fury. "You gave us a fake deed," he growled, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. "You took our money and used collateral that does not even exist. You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me how you are going to pay us back, Jamal, before we take this outside." Jamal completely broke down. The arrogant, smug, visionary entrepreneur was entirely gone. He started sweating profusely, large drops rolling down his forehead and soaking the collar of his expensive designer shirt. He looked at the massive man looming over him and then looked at the closing attorney who was already dialing the phone to call the authorities. Jamal realized he was completely trapped. In a moment of pure cowardly desperation, Jamal did exactly what selfish scammers always do. He turned on his own family to save himself. "It was her," Jamal screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my sister. "I did not do it. I did not forge anything. Brittany printed the documents. Brittany traced the signature. She told me her father gave her permission to handle the limited liability company. I had absolutely no idea the paperwork was fake. She lied to me too. Brittany stared at her husband in absolute stunned silence. The man she had defended, the man she had thrown our parents onto the street for, was tossing her straight to the federal authorities to save his own skin. The shock on her face quickly twisted into raw, unhinged fury. "You lying coward!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You told me to trace it. It was your idea." Before Jamal could even step back, Brittany lunged across the mahogany table. She grabbed the collar of his cashmere sweater and shoved him hard against the leather chairs. Jamal shouted, trying to push her away, but she was completely out of control, hitting his chest and screaming that he had ruined her entire life. The pristine luxury conference room dissolved into absolute chaotic violence, while David and I simply stood back and watched them destroy each other. The luxury conference room completely dissolved into absolute chaos. My sister Brittany and her husband Jamal were physically fighting against the leather chairs, screaming vile accusations at each other. Jamal was desperately trying to push Brittany away, while she clawed at his cashmere sweater, shrieking that he had ruined her entire life. David took a step back and calmly adjusted his suit jacket, watching the destruction with professional detachment. I stood completely still, letting the reality of their implosion wash over me. The closing attorney, his face pale with shock, was shouting into his cell phone, demanding that building security and the local police be dispatched immediately to the fourth floor. Caroline collapsed into a chair in the corner, sobbing hysterically as she realized her lucrative career was officially over. The representative for the hard money lenders stood near the door, his thick arms crossed over his chest, blocking the exit and making sure Jamal did not try to make a run for the elevators. Less than 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors swung open. 4 uniformed police officers rushed into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. The closing attorney immediately stepped forward. He pointed directly at Jamal and Brittany, who had finally stopped fighting and were now staring at the officers in absolute terror. The attorney handed the police the forged limited liability company operating agreement and my certified legal documents. He explained in a frantic voice that the 2 individuals had just attempted to execute a fraudulent real estate closing, forging corporate signatures to steal over $500,000 across state lines. Because the transaction involved out-of-state digital wire transfers and forged corporate identities, the lead police officer informed them that this was no longer a local dispute. It was a massive federal wire fraud case, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation would be taking over jurisdiction. Jamal immediately tried to turn on his smooth-talking charm. He raised his hands in surrender, forcing a nervous smile, and told the officers there was just a simple misunderstanding about family estate planning. He claimed he was just trying to help his sick father-in-law, but the police were not interested in his pathetic excuses. One officer grabbed Jamal's arm, spun him around roughly, and slammed him against the mahogany table, snapping heavy metal handcuffs onto his wrists. Brittany completely lost her mind. When the second officer approached her with handcuffs, she dropped to her knees. She started wailing, begging the officers to let her call her mother, screaming that she was the victim and that her husband had manipulated her into doing it. The officer simply hauled her to her feet and locked the cuffs tightly around her wrists. I watched silently as the golden child of our family, the woman who had spent her entire life stepping on everyone else to get what she wanted, was publicly humiliated and dragged out of the luxury law firm in tears. Jamal followed right behind her, his head hung low in ultimate defeat. David and I gathered our documents, thanked the closing attorney for his swift cooperation, and walked out of the building. We stepped into the bright Florida sunlight. Just as I reached my car, my cell phone started vibrating heavily in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw my mother's name flashing on the screen. Brittany must have used her one phone call at the precinct to reach her. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for the final emotional battle, and answered the call. "Stella," my mother screamed into the phone, her voice completely hysterical. "What did you do?" "Brittany just called me from a police station. She was sobbing, saying you had her arrested for federal fraud." You have to go down there right now and tell them it was a massive mistake. You have to drop the charges, Stella. She is your sister. She is family. You cannot send her to prison. I stood leaning against the warm metal of my car. 2 days ago, this exact tone of voice from my mother would have broken my heart. It would have made me feel guilty and small. But not today. Today I felt absolutely nothing but cold, hard clarity. Mom, I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and perfectly steady. I did not have her arrested. She had herself arrested when she forged my signature and tried to steal a $547,000 house. She committed a severe federal crime. I cannot just walk into a police station and drop federal charges. That is not how the legal system works. You can hire her a lawyer. My mother pleaded, her voice cracking with pure desperation. You have money, Stella. You know powerful people like that lawyer you brought with you today. You have to save her. Jamal manipulated her. She did not know what she was doing. Please, Stella, do not let them take my baby girl away from me. I closed my eyes for a brief second. She was still doing it. Even after Brittany had thrown her out of her own home, changed the locks, and dumped her in a roach-infested motel, my mother was still fiercely defending the golden child. She was still demanding that I sacrifice my own peace, my own money, and my own safety to rescue the exact person who had actively tried to destroy us. I gripped the phone tighter and delivered the absolute final boundary. Listen to me very carefully, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a low, unbreakable pitch. Brittany is a grown woman. She made her bed in a federal cell. You can either live in the beautiful house I bought you, or you can sleep on the floor outside her jail. Pick now. The line went completely dead silent. I could hear my mother taking quick, shaky breaths on the other end, but she did not say a single word. The harsh, brutal reality of my ultimatum had finally pierced through her lifetime of deep delusion. She knew I was not bluffing. She knew I held all the cards. If she chose Brittany, she would be completely cut off, left to navigate my father's dementia and her own survival with absolutely zero financial or emotional support from me. If she chose me, she would have her safe haven back, but she would have to accept that her golden child was a criminal who was going to pay the ultimate price. The heavy silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I waited, refusing to fill the space, refusing to offer any comfort or compromise. I needed her to say it out loud. Okay, my mother finally whispered, her voice sounding incredibly small, defeated, and completely broken. Okay, Stella. We will stay in the house. I will send a car to bring you and Dad back to the beach house this afternoon, I replied coldly. I will see you there. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. It was finally over. The toxic cycle that had ruled my family for my entire life was permanently shattered. 6 months have passed since the explosive morning in that luxury conference room. The relentless Florida heat has finally given way to a gentle coastal breeze. As I sit on the wraparound wooden porch of the beach house, watching the ocean waves roll in the absolute chaos of the past, feels like a distant nightmare. My father, Richard, is sitting in the rocking chair next to me. He is wrapped in a soft blanket, humming along to an old country song playing softly from the radio. His medications have been properly adjusted by Dr. Bennett, and his cognitive decline is being managed with professional daily nursing care that I arranged. He is safe. He is happy. And most importantly, he is still living in the beautiful home that he deserves. The fallout from that Monday morning was swift and incredibly destructive for the people who tried to tear our family apart. Jamal did exactly what I expected a cowardly manipulator to do. The moment the federal investigators began pulling his financial records, he completely turned on my sister. He filed for divorce less than 2 weeks after the arrests, hoping to distance himself from the forged corporate documents. He tried to claim he was just an innocent husband who trusted his wife. But federal agents are just as thorough as financial auditors. They followed the money trail. They uncovered his massive cryptocurrency debts and the fraudulent $150,000 bridge loan he took out against my property. Because the loan sharks used an unregulated shadow company, Jamal could not discharge that debt in his personal bankruptcy filing. The federal prosecutors did not offer him a lenient plea deal. His bank accounts were seized, his luxury cars were repossessed, and he currently lives in a state of constant paranoia. He is constantly dodging phone calls and looking over his shoulder, terrified that the violent debt collectors will finally catch up with him. He lost his marriage, his money, and his freedom, all because he tried to steal what was not his. Caroline, the arrogant real estate agent, who thought she was too important to check the chain of title, faced her own brutal reality. The cash buyer she alienated filed a massive formal complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. When the board investigated the transaction and discovered she had facilitated a fraudulent closing, they did not hesitate. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. She is currently drowning in civil lawsuits from the title company and the furious cash buyer. She lost her prestigious position at the luxury brokerage, and her reputation in the coastal real estate market was entirely destroyed. Last I heard, she was working the night shift at a local grocery store, stripped of the arrogant smirk she wore when she told me to get off my own property. And then there is Brittany, the golden child who spent her entire life manipulating my parents and stepping on me to get whatever she wanted. She is currently living in a tiny studio apartment wearing a bulky GPS ankle monitor. She is under strict federal house arrest, awaiting her criminal trial for wire fraud and identity theft. She faces up to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The reality of a prison sentence has completely broken her spirit. The most poetic part of her punishment is her absolute isolation. For the first few months, she called my mother, constantly begging for money, for expensive lawyers, crying her fake tears, and trying to pull the same manipulative tricks she always used. But the ultimatum I delivered outside the police station held firm. My mother, Diane, finally saw the true face of the monster she had enabled. My mother stopped answering Brittany's calls, completely cutting off the emotional and financial supply my sister relied on her entire life. My relationship with my mother is forever changed. The blind devotion she once had for Brittany is completely gone, replaced by a quiet, humbling guilt. She lives here at the beach house, but she lives under my strict rules. She understands now that I was the one who truly loved them enough to protect them. She spends her days taking care of my father's garden and apologizing to me through her actions rather than empty words. It will take years to rebuild any real trust between us, but the toxic cycle of enabling is officially dead. As I sip my coffee and watch my rescue dog Cooper chase seagulls along the shoreline, I feel a profound sense of peace. I look at my father, who smiles and points at a sailboat on the horizon. He does not remember the terrifying afternoon he spent in that roach-infested motel, and I am so grateful that his mind spared him that trauma. But I will never forget it. I will never forget the lengths greedy people will go to when they think nobody is watching. People often say that blood is thicker than water. They use that phrase to guilt you into forgiving toxic family members who repeatedly disrespect your boundaries and threaten your safety. But blood does not equal loyalty. True family is not defined by biology. It is defined by the people who protect you, who respect you, and who stand by you when things get difficult. Cutting out toxic bloodlines is the most painful surgery you will ever undergo, but it is the only way to save your own life. I built a fortress to protect the people I love, and when the wolves came knocking, I did not just lock the door. I completely destroyed them. This story is a powerful reminder that financial boundaries are absolutely essential, even when dealing with your own family. Far too often we are conditioned to believe that we must blindly trust our parents or our siblings simply because we share the same blood. But as my journey shows, toxic behavior does not disappear just because someone is related to you. If you are stepping up to provide financial support or care for aging parents, you must take proactive legal steps to protect those assets. Setting up a blind limited liability company or an irrevocable trust is not a sign of distrust. It is a necessary shield against the unexpected greed of others. Do not wait for a crisis to secure your boundaries. The most painful lesson I learned is that the people who demand the most from you are often the ones willing to sacrifice your well-being to save themselves. When someone shows you their true colors through manipulation or financial abuse, you must believe them the very first time. Protect your peace, your assets, and the vulnerable people you love with unwavering strength. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from a toxic family member? How did you find the courage to stand your ground when everyone else turned against you? I would absolutely love to read your stories and connect with you in the comments section below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them might give someone else the exact courage they need today. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about overcoming family toxicity and reclaiming your independence. Remember that standing up for yourself is never a betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-love. Thank you so much for watching.